It is 1:00. Thanks so much for being with us here, the Wednesday edition of the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break, along with Edgar and Naj, ACSA Senior Director of Policy and Governmental Relations. I'm Naj Alikhan, ACSA Senior Director of Marketing and Communications. Welcome. Again, so happy to have you. Go ahead and jump onto our chat today. Say hello. Let us know where you're watching from. Apparently, Edgar, first off, good afternoon. Good to see you. We had 80 plus people waiting on our YouTube platform ahead of the show. So apparently what our topic is going to be create some type of interest here in the States.
I guess here we thought in the summer people would, would maybe find other things to do. But it just goes to show that the topic is important and people are trying to make sense of this. And I have to imagine some of our members here are on summer vacation and they're still working or they're choosing to watch us rather than the European soccer championships here, which I will not confirm or deny that I was actually paying attention to while writing emails about independent study. But hey, they're here with us, so always appreciate it.
Don't think for a second that Edgar hasn't been running out of his office every single time something big happens in that game to yell down the hall to me, Naj, did you see that? Did you see that? That's going on. Hey, again, thank you so much, folks, for being here. Want to say hello to all of our viewers, Mandy and Perla, Ryan, Denise. So good to have all of you. Maria Thompson, our great board member over in Region 15, was the first one to jump on with us today on the chat. Edgar, I do want to make mention of this. Two things. One, on my drive in here today, it was really nice to see people outside of the Capitol taking pictures and selfies. It's nice to see, that activity around the state Capitol because you and I pass it every single day when we come in here. However, as KCRA, the NBC affiliate here in Sacramento, reported yesterday, that mask mandate is back inside the state Capitol because there are COVID cases in there. Just from your experience, Edgar, inside the Capitol, seeing people and how there is that interaction between people plus visitors and all of that, what's the impact of that mask mandate coming back inside the Capitol, knowing your staff is in there all the time?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's been an interesting time here in Sacramento. I mean, it was just recently where the Capitol kind of opened up to a little bit broader population here, having folks come in and out. But as you mentioned, Naj, the last week, I think there's some frayed nerves, I would say, because there has been some positive cases. I will say most of them have been isolated and we don't know a lot, privacy and whatnot in terms of details of what office or whatnot, but they have been isolated out of a legislative office. What I think got people nervous as well is that there was a couple of cases, at least based on what's been reported from folks that were also vaccinated. So I think that's got people a little bit nervous. There's been a couple additional cases. So I think even as we have all of this good news in terms of COVID rates, and I think it mirrors kind of this conversation that's happened over the last week or two, it just everybody seems to be a little bit more nervous about what's happening with this Delta variant, what's going to be the repercussions of that. And I think this is one of those pieces we're going to have to keep an eye on what happens here, not just in Sacramento, locally, but as we see some of these trends as we're moving to the beginning of the school year.
Yeah, I want to make mention, Terrence Dunn asks specifically about that ACSA email that went out that had a breakdown of some of the independent study program changes. And Terrence is asking for that email again. Terrence, if you go to our resource hub in maybe a couple of hours or so, content.acsa.org, or you can access the resource hub from our website at ACSA.org. We'll have the information on there for you and for everybody else to refer to. Also want to give you, because we value you guys being here, our broadcast schedule here in July. So pull out your calendars, folks, because we want to make sure that you are aware of this. Next Wednesday, that is July 14th. No show next week because Edgar approved my vacation for next week. Thank you, Edgar, for doing that.
I had to think about it there for a second. I know you're disappointing a lot of people here on this call, but hey, I guess you deserve some time off. So
yeah, exactly right. We will have a show July 21st, that is the following Wednesday, you can expect that we will be hearing from some of our education leaders about how they're implementing some of this independent study work that we'll be talking about. And then no show July 28th. Because I approved Edgar having some vacation time. It'll be the last time he gets.
If we really worked things out, we would have mirrored our schedules. We would have figured this out, but maybe our families weren't good. We could have gone together wherever you're going. You could have invited me, Naj.
All right, let me ask this before we move into what are you doing for your week of vacation? I know
this is going to sound very boring, but my goal is to simply turn off the phone and turn off the computer. So to be announced. I'm sure I'll have some great stories after the fact. I don't have anything planned. I actually just don't want to be on the computer or my phone for a few days.
Okay, we'll see if you're able to actually hold up on that. I can guarantee that won't be the case. Edgar, we are going to talk independent study. Let me just ask you before we bring on our two guests here. We were waiting on this, much like we've been waiting for CDC to come out with their mask updates and guidance and all of that. We have still been waiting. We were still waiting on this independent study, and then it has finally come out. Before we go into the nuts and bolts, what reaction have you heard from education leaders over these last few days?
Just from what we see even here in terms of the questions and also just the anticipation, I would say angst, a little bit of angst, not necessarily because some of the things that they're putting out there that are not attainable or that we can't do them from an implementation standpoint. There's some legitimate questions, and I know our guests will get into that. I think the bigger issue is just timing here. We are literally on the brink of some schools opening up for the new academic year, and we're just getting these rules, and there's some requirements. So I think it's first, let me make sure I understand all this, and then it's really into implementation mode. What do I do with all this? What are the nuts and bolts that I have to get in place before I get students here into my schools very shortly?
Well, we often call this show the Education for the Educators, which we are bringing on two experts now to talk specifically about independent study. So let's bring them on right now. Patti Herrera, Vice President at School Services of California, and Barrett Snider, partner over at Capital Advisors, two of our frequent guests. We are so happy and honored to have both of you here today, Patti and Barrett. Good to see you today. Barrett, we're going to give you the tough job right off the top because we figured it'd be fun to have you have that tough job. A big picture overview of what we have learned this week with regards to independent study. And then Patti, you can jump in and tell us what Barrett got wrong right after that. Uh-oh, did we lose Barrett? Did he purposely drop his audio so that he didn't have to answer this?
I'm here.
There we go. All right, Barrett, it's all yours.
We've been doing this remote stuff for so long, you still can't get the mute button right. So I apologize. That's all me. Good to see you guys. And Edgar, I promise not to call you on your vacation. So yeah, let's do the overview here, right? So this dropped in the budget trailer bill that was out at the beginning of the week. This just kind of set the stage. This is something that Patti and I and Edgar, ACSA, CSBA, ACSA, labor too, CTA, CFT, and the charter school groups. We were all lobbying this issue extensively together as a coalition prior to this language dropping, and we raised a lot of issues that I think are going to come up in this conversation. So I would tell you that there are a lot of issues here that are known that we're going to try and get resolved still. But just to give you the broad overview, again, this is an SB and AB 130, the budget trailer bill. It is one of the many provisions in there. First off, that it's going to require independent study for the 21-22 school year for school districts and county offices of education. There are some waivers of that requirement that I know we'll talk about here, but just to say that it's required. That goes along with a requirement that you then notify parents and families and students of that option for 21-22. These changes take effect immediately, right? So when the governor signs this is going to go into law. And the changes that we described to you are not just for the 21-22 school year. This has come up a couple times as I've talked to folks. These are requirements that you offer it and requirement that you notify. Those are the only two things that are specific to 21-22. The rest of the changes to independent study are for next year, take effect immediately, and are in perpetuity. They are upending the independent study that we've known, program that's been around for 40 years, and they're making pretty substantial changes. The next piece here is that they are now requiring for independent study that you provide a parent-pupil-teacher conference prior to executing the written agreement. I will say that the language, the way it's written, is a little unclear, and I'm interested to hear Patti and others weigh in on this. It seems to imply that you have to do it prior to the agreement being signed, that you did this conference. But I've talked to some staff that have said, and our intention was that it's only upon request of the parent or the family. So there's a little clarification at least needed here, but that's a new requirement that'll go in one way or the other. They add some new definitions here around what live interaction means, what synchronous instruction means. We'll talk about that. You have to measure satisfactory educational progress now. They define that, and we can talk about that a little bit more. They make it clear that in independent study that you have to offer all of the courses that are required for graduation locally and by the state, but that you also have to offer courses that are approved for UC, CSU, A through G courses. That provision, to me, could be fairly limiting in some places, but that's a new one. You have to have tiered re-engagement strategies for students that are not making satisfactory educational progress, and they have a whole litany of rules around that. And the big piece, though, are new requirements for interaction and synchronous instruction. And the way they did this is they structured it by grades. So you got TK through 3, 4 through 8, 9 through 12. And then at the younger grades, you have to do more daily synchronous instruction. And then at the upper grades, at the high school level, there's a lot less of it. We can talk the details here in a minute. But what I'll say here is another area where we've flagged some ambiguity around the word opportunity, because it says you have to provide opportunities for this. What does opportunity mean? Does that mean it's a requirement, or does that mean you just have to offer it? That seems to be an area of clarification. You have to allow families that are in independent study to exit within 5 days, which is a new requirement. There are some requirements around documenting all of this stuff around daily interaction and synchronous instruction. One thing that we like, they're allowing electronic signatures now, so you can have families sign electronically. You no longer have to get a wet signature. That's explicit now in the code. None of the new requirements are waivable by the state board. And there's some other stuff that I'm sure we'll talk about. But that, I think, is the best quick and dirty version of the overall thing that I can come up with. But Patti, if there's some other areas that I missed, feel free to jump in.
I think Barrett did a great job of summarizing what feels like, a ton of changes that, as he mentioned, many of them, almost all of them, are permanent changes to independent study. The way that I would characterize the changes in the trailer bill as negotiated between the governor and the legislature is that a lot of the provisions that will be newly installed with the signing of the trailer bill are what our lawmakers consider program quality guardrails, right? To ensure that students have the supports that they need, both instructional and non-instructional supports that they need to thrive in their program. And when there are clear signals that they are not thriving, either academically or for non-academic reasons, then they want swift action. They want an engagement strategy or an intervention strategy, and then swift action to place that student in a program which they, that they'll better thrive in. So I would couch it that way. I do want to acknowledge that there's some, I think we all know, although one program is much, much less used in the state, that there are two different types of independent study programs. And I saw a question pop up in the comment box about whether or not the requirements apply to non-classroom based charter schools. And the answer to that is simply, they also changed the law to have all of these provisions apply to all types of local educational agencies. And it doesn't distinguish between non-classroom based and classroom based charter schools. So, so it's important to understand and to answer that question very clearly. But there's also some differences in some pretty key requirements, that some of which Barrett had mentioned, between those districts that invoke or use course-based independent study programs, or are operating or administering traditional independent study programs. For example, one of the big differences is one of the new requirements is before you can offer independent study, traditional independent study, an LEA has to post on their website so that all parents can see it, what all students' educational options will be for the 21-22 school year. And then also articulate the parent's right to request a parent-pupil educator conference, is what they call it. And then, as Barrett had said, you know, if a parent requests a conference before enrolling a student in traditional independent study, you have to have this parent-pupil educator conference to you know, let them ask their questions and, you know, and whatever. That requirement does not apply to course-based independent study. So it is important to, you know, for our viewers here today to kind of ask themselves, what kind of independent study program am I operating? And you could be operating both. That's possible to do that, but you'll need to understand the requirements for each. There's a lot of overlap, but there are some differences.
Patti, both you and Barrett have talked about obviously the requirements, and I think we've already seen some comments from some of the viewers that given the size of their district or other factors that they may not be able to do this. There's a waiver provision in the bill. So can you explain, you know, how that works and who would be eligible? And actually, if you don't mind, we obviously we're all insiders here and we kind of understand legislative process. I've seen a couple questions about, wait a minute, governor hasn't signed this. Is this gonna is this gonna change? So maybe just the quick answer on that, on kind of where we're at in the process, and then explaining the waiver.
Sure. As Barrett mentioned at the top of the hour, or when he was giving the overview, he mentioned that the bill was introduced on Monday. That's very, very strategic. And that's because the legislature wants to vote on this bill on Thursday. And so, you know, this trailer bill language, at least as we understand it from those of us on the inside, we recognize this as an agreement between the governor and the legislature. Barrett may have a different opinion about this, so I would definitely welcome him to share his opinion about this. But I actually think, because this was a tightly controlled negotiation, as Barrett mentioned, we had been lobbying this really, really hard in partnership with each other and along with the other partners that Barrett mentioned toward the end of May, early June, and then they went silent on us. We tried every which way to break into the negotiating room, and of course they boxed us out. That's not atypical, by the way, but it was very, very tightly controlled. So my sense is that it's going to be really hard to get any changes to this, because it was so delicately negotiated, which is why I think it's so important. And I really applaud you guys for having this conversation today, because I do think that Barrett and I and all of us here can help allay some concerns around some of the language. But to your question specifically about the waiver process, so a couple of things. One, for the 21-22 school year only, this is one of the things that Barrett highlighted. School districts and county offices will be mandated to provide independent study programs. Really, this is at the request of a student, right? If there's not a student who doesn't request it, of course you don't have to provide it. And then the law says that, what does the provision look like, right? The provision is, I, as an LEA, school district or county office of education, I can deliver the program with my own means. I can contract with the county office of education. I'm thinking small regional, places or whatever. I can contract with the county office of education to deliver it for me, or I can enter into, and they don't limit the number of this, I can enter into inter-district transfer agreements to be able to serve those students who need or want an independent study program. If there is a waiver process for this, so school districts and county offices of education can request a waiver. For school districts, the waiver would go to the county superintendent of schools over, that has jurisdiction over them, to basically say, and there are two conditions that must be met in order for you to be able to secure a waiver, really at the discretion of your county superintendent. One is you're demonstrating that this is basically a fiscal burden on you. It's fiscally unreasonable for you to be able to provide this. I think of economies of scale, and I've got one student, and this I can't do one student to one teacher. It just doesn't make any sense. And the ability to either contract for the delivery of the program or to enter into interdistrict agreements is not viable. If you meet those two conditions, it opens the door for your county superintendent to waive the mandate requirement. For single district counties, did I say that right? For single district counties and county offices of education, your adjudicator on the waiver process is the state superintendent of public instruction. Same process and same requirements, but because of governance issues, it would be the state superintendent. So there is a, I guess I would call it a relief valve, but it's very tight, right? I don't think it'll be easy for you to demonstrate that you can't, in the very least, you can't contract it out, or your county office of education is not willing to step in and help you.
All right, folks, we are going to just dive into these questions because we have a lot. We have more than 200 people watching us live. Just want to make note of this. Michelle and Deanna, you were asking about Assembly Bill 104. We will get you more information on that a little bit this afternoon on our ACSA resource hub. That's content.acsa.org. Barrett, let me go to you and Pat, if you want to jump in as well. Maria Thompson, our board member over in Region 15, she says, are there minimum minutes or guidance in regards to the daily synchronous instructions and the live interaction parts? Barrett, have you seen anything specific to that?
I think, so the minute requirements essentially remain the same for, the minimum number of minutes you have to offer for courses the same. The calculation that a teacher does, an independent study teacher, around equating completed work still applies. So there were versions of this that were floating around at one point that specified minimum number of minutes for synchronous instruction that didn't make it in here. So those aren't there. You just have to offer it at K through 3. I think it says daily, at 4 through 8 weekly, that kind of a thing. But there's no minimum time frame for that in the language.
Yeah, the way that I would agree with Barrett's interpretation of the language. So as Barrett mentioned, by grade span, and they're not equivalent to the LCFF grade spans, as he mentioned. It's 4 through 8. I guess that is equivalent. Anyway, so for K through 3, it requires daily synchronous instruction. However, as noted by Maria, there is, or suggested through her question, there is no minimum number of synchronous instructional minutes. But as Barrett mentioned, as has always been the case under independent study, you are required to meet daily minimum instructional minutes, just like a classroom-based program. You would do that, of course, through measuring the time value of student work and the asynchronous portion of their day, right? So for example, and help, I think, in a way that's very useful. And I think this is the part where I wanted to kind of allay some concerns that are emerging from the field. Understandably, it's a big shift. Is that, daily synchronous instruction, they define as it can include instruction in a classroom style setting, even virtually by Zoom. It could be in person, it could be by video, even telephonic communications. It could be one-on-one, and it could be designated small group. So you have a lot of design flexibility for delivering synchronous instruction. And because it doesn't require a minimum number of synchronous instructional minutes. So for example, if you have done or are planning to do sort of what we would call office hours, like 30-minute office hours or something like that, where a student can come, you know, into a Zoom session or whatever with their teacher to ask questions, that would count as meeting the synchronous instructional requirements. The daily live interaction piece, or the live interaction piece, is different than instructional minutes, as you all know. So live interaction is defined as video, telephonic, or in-person in-person interaction between an LEA staff. So it's either classified or certificated. They're not prejudicing one type of staff against the other, and the student. And it can include any kind of touch point, you know, a wellness check would suffice for live interaction. And by grade spans, it's K through 3. They don't have a daily live interaction requirement because they require synchronous instruction every day. Makes sense. Grades 4 to 8, at least once weekly synchronous instruction. And because they're only doing it once a week, they want to see daily live interaction for this student group. For 9 through 12, no daily live interaction and at least once weekly synchronous instruction. So that's how that breaks down. But I do think, you know, again, trying to allay some of the concerns is because they don't set minimum number of instructional minutes, and they're very, very, their definitions for interaction and and instruction are pretty broad. I think folks can do a lot in terms of program design around those parameters.
I almost joke and say that we're going to have a test after all this to remember. That's almost cruel because we know, you know, kind of what the state is doing here at the 11th hour. So on that note, I feel like the collective, you know, response from our folks is like, this is like when you're in a class and the instructor assigns you something, it's like with a very short timeline. So on that note, one of the questions we got from Jovi, I believe, was, do the new independent study board policies need to be approved prior to the start of the school year? So kind of the collective, what do I need to do now? And what's immediate? What's kind of long-term? Patti, we'll start with you to try to answer that.
Yeah, unfortunately, this is not one of the changes that we would have wanted to see a change around this. And as Barrett mentioned, we had asked for deferred implementation because in recognition, and Barrett works with some folks directly who they've either already started. I actually have I know a school district that's already started their school year because they're a year-round education school district. And so we didn't want these new requirements upon signature of the governor, because that's when trailer bills become effective. We didn't want it to disrupt programs that were already being offered and utilizing these statutory authorities for the summer. But this is one of those requirements that didn't change. And so you do have to install your revised written board policies before the start of the school year. I don't know how this is going to affect those districts that have already, like the district that I'm talking about, that have already started their school year. I would hope that the state of California would recognize, just even the legal timing issue. And so you definitely have to do that. So that one of the things that I think everybody here today needs to walk away understanding is that these changes in independent study law are going to require a significant revision to your written board policies, as well as your learning and master agreements. Now, I'll let Barrett answer the question. I'm sure, though, there's going to be a follow-up question to the learning and master agreements and the timing of those. So I'll let Barrett answer that question.
Sure. I mean, the timing issues here are, and Patti, I've talked to a couple of districts, like you mentioned, that started instruction on July 1st. And so the way this appears to work is that it goes into effect immediately. And that means that you need to immediately adopt new board policies if you have existing ones around independent study that come into compliance with these new requirements around synchronous instruction and interaction, monitoring satisfactory educational progress. All of that's got to be in your new board policy that's adopted by the board. You then need to revise the master agreement that your families have signed, and that's got to be done prior to, well, it has to be, that has to be completed and signed by the parents within 30 days of the first day of instruction. So using the July 1 example, if you're particularly a county office program and you're running a year-round calendar, you started instruction and maybe it's your first trimester or whatever, July 1, you're operating on a board policy and a master agreement that's not in compliance with the law. The board would need to revise that policy. Staff would need to redo the written agreements. And then one thing that's unclear here is this requirement here that says you have to have a pupil teacher parent conference. One interpretation of the language is that you have to do that with everyone prior to executing the agreement. But I'm talking to some staff who say that it's only this potential request from the parent to have this conference. That all has to happen within 30 days of the first day of instruction. Every day after that 30-day period where you do not have a fully compliant and executed written agreement, you are subject to not collecting ADA for that day. So that's one. But let me make one real crucial clarification here, which is regardless of what the master agreement says, on the first day of instruction for the 21-22 school year, you have to comply with the daily interaction requirements, the synchronous instruction requirements, the monitoring of satisfactory educational progress. So despite that not being in your written agreement, you are going to be audited on those things at the end with audit guidance that has not yet been written and standards by which they're going to measure all of this stuff, which aren't yet known. It's a real problem. So what I would say to you is, one, get moving ASAP. Talk to your auditor about how they're going to measure this stuff, or how they're thinking they're going to measure this stuff. They're going to say, well, we don't have audit guidance. You can say, yes, I know that, but what can we be doing now?
Did we lose Barrett? I think we lost him. All right. Well, let me first off, let me acknowledge this to our viewers, because we have so many of you that are on here and we have so many questions. We normally wrap the show at 1:30. We're going to go ahead and blow past this so that way we can get your questions answered. Patti, as Barrett is trying to work on his audio, let me ask you about notification. We have a question from Aida. She asked, regarding parent notifications, is posting on the website sufficient? Passive notification, or do we need to send a notification to each family now that the law has changed? Let me also ask a follow-up, because Susan Keeler asked the question, do families have to have a doctor's note which verifies there is a health risk for students to come in person? So we got a two-parter there, Patti. What can you tell us in regard to notification?
So I want to acknowledge that there are two different notification requirements in the new language. One is that notification that we talked about posting on your website for all parents of enrolled students to be able to view what the educational options will be for 2021. I'm sorry, 21, 22. I can't wait till we get past the 20s. 21, 22. That notification, at least in my read of the language, just a posting on the website for everybody to access is sufficient. You don't necessarily, it doesn't say that you necessarily need to send like a written notification to parents on this, but it does have to include, that notification has to include very specific provisions or statements, including the expectations for live interaction and synchronous instruction for that school year, and then also a notification of the right to request that conference that Barrett has talked about. There's that notification. There's also a notification requirement if a student enrolled in IS finds themselves not thriving, and you as an LEA have determined that student isn't thriving based on a number of measures as prescribed in the new language, including is not making satisfactory educational progress, which has certain triggers, and which, sorry, you guys, and the triggers differ between traditional independent study and course-based independent study. So if you're not dizzy enough, let that cause you to feel a little bit of vertigo. But that notification to parents about either the lack of satisfactory educational progress for their student, lack of participation in the program or violation of agreement, the students violating their agreement, that to me is something that has to be delivered, to the parent. And obviously this is not something you would post on a website. Just wanted to acknowledge the two different types of notification requirements. And then with respect to the parent note, the doctor's note for participating in independent study, no. The language that they add that says, if a student has a medical reason, and this is one of the reasons why an LEA can offer independent study to that student as their educational option. They don't specify that it has to be accompanied by a medical note. But even if they didn't specify it, because IS is open really to all students, they wouldn't even need to justify the desire to participate in independent study for medical reasons.
Okay, speaking of tests, this is going to be a test to see if Barrett's audio will work here, but we're going to try. Alan, a question related to something you said earlier, Barrett, in terms of what can be done electronically. He asked specifically in regards to the daily live interaction, would it have to be a wellness check via form count, or would it actually need to be face-to-face? How will this work based on what we know? I know that there's still some unanswered questions.
Yeah, how's the audio? Is that all right? All right, good. Sorry about that. So there's language in here that allows that check to be either like a Zoom check-in online. It can also be telephonic. So they use telephone technology. So it just needs to be a live check-in. And yes, it can be a certificated or a classified employee. Anyone that's involved with the educational program of the student is going to work for that. So that should be fairly flexible in terms of who does the check and how you do it.
Uh-oh.
Audio problems abound.
All right, we'll figure this out. Naj is muted. Hey, this is what happens when we have
hold on. All right, now, am I back now? All right, here we go. I'm moving through stuff here. All right, Anthony Little asks a very similar question that Scott Smith asks. Scott Smith over at ABC Unified. So we'll put it all together. Where can districts find specific information regarding the differences between course-based IS and traditional IS? Is there a repository, or can we just detail it here in 30 seconds or less?
It would be really, really hard to detail the differences between course-based independent study and traditional independent study, especially with the proposed changes in the trailer bill. I hesitate to say this because I really don't want to make it sound like an advertisement. But in early June, my colleague and I, Matt Phillips, and I put on a webinar specifically to talk about independent study, where we really dissected the differences between CBIS and traditional independent study. And I think all of you know that, next week, School Services of California will be delivering our school finance conference, where we unpack the enacted budget for you. And I'm sure that there are many folks, including Barrett's organization, that will be doing the same. And we will have a very detailed analysis of the trailer bill language on independent study and break it down by what applies to CBIS and what applies to traditional independent study. But I'm not aware of a single repository. And if you go on to, I hope CDE is not watching this, but if you go onto CDE's website right now, it is not useful. My understanding is that they intend to revise their website, but right now it's not very useful. I'm sorry, but Barrett, maybe you know.
You know what that says? That says we got to get Tony on the show so we can give him a hard time about how the website isn't working the way it should be.
We will not attribute that to Patti Herrera.
She's right. I agree. Yeah.
Let me try one more question, Patti. I think we're still struggling with Barrett there a second, but he gave us a quick affirmative, so we'll go with that. Patti, can you just, I know we've already tried to hit on this, but this is, like we said, some of this we're just going to have to be talking about for some time. And I know at ACSA, we're going to try to put out some information through our various means. I think it's fair game for both of you folks to plug your conferences coming up, because I know you'll be trying to translate this as well. But we did get asked again. Someone comment on from Daniel. Can we comment on the new requirements for documenting daily interaction? How does this differ from the distance learning forms that we all grew accustomed to and I think equally did not like? So Patti, do you want to touch on that?
Yes. Daniel, can I tell you that this was one of the victories that we actually, our advocacy gained, was we got rid of the weekly engagement log, because that's something that they wanted to carry forward. And I do know that some of you like the weekly engagement log, so I apologize to any of you who I might have offended. But to us, it seemed redundant, right? Because we're like, okay, teachers, either general supervising teachers or even content area teachers are already tracking student work, right? And so why do we have to do this, redundant log here? So this is something that they ended up getting rid of in the current version of the trailer bill. So thankfully that's good. That's great. But it does specify that participation can be documented in it. Well, they mentioned this in a couple of places. It can be, documented through like an LMS system, because we know how robust learning management systems are in terms of collecting, maintaining records of, and evidence of student engagement and participation. It could be documentation of assignments, completion of assignments, completion of assessments, or just even participation, right? Because I have to have this live synchronous instruction or synchronous instruction once weekly, like showing that Patti showed up on Zoom the day, the day that was scheduled or whatever. That's also documentation that can be found, obviously, in your learning management system. And the law and the trailer bill also says this, that it says, it is the intent of the legislature that teachers shall be provided basically a learning management system. And I think that a lot of districts went out and acquired software to manage distance learning this year. So that's the same software that you could use for documentation of participation and in their learning program. So I hope that helps clarify that question a little bit.
Patti, follow up, kind of related on that note from Joe. Does synchronous instruction need to be done by the student's assigned classroom teacher or specialists like PE, music? Do they have to do it on a given day? What advice would you give?
The unlike live interaction, which can be conducted by any staff member in the LEA, synchronous instruction has to be delivered by the certificated, I think it says general supervising staff, right, Barrett? And so this question comes up at the secondary level, right? Because you've got courses, you've got sections that students are taking. They've got their science class, they've got their math class, and does the synchronous requirement apply to content area teachers? If I remember this correctly, and I apologize, the trailer bill is 400 pages. So Barrett and I are probably still going through the entire trailer bill. I think it says general supervising teacher. I could be wrong, and if I am wrong, I'm hoping Barrett can correct me.
I'm looking up, and I think you're right.
Hey, Patti, while that's being looked up, let me ask this Susan Keeler question, because this just came in. Is there a minimum amount of time students would have to be on independent study? Can they jump back and forth? And actually, this leads me to another question, because I've heard this from teachers about that jump back and whether there will be any connectivity to the school on the basis of what they're doing, their independent study, and then maybe going back into the classroom. Will there be any connectivity back to their particular school? But Susan's question is there a minimum amount of time that the student would have to be on independent study, and can they jump back and forth?
I don't know if Barrett's audio is answer the question. Okay. So the way that I read, there's a couple of things. As Barrett, we all know that if for non-charter school independent study programs, existing law without this trailer bill change requires students to be participating in an independent study program for at least 5 consecutive days before counting basically as an IS student. That doesn't mean you can't count those 5 days of instruction, but they have to be at least enrolled in and participating in an IS program for at least 5 consecutive days. The trailer bill reduces that down to 3 days, just so that you know. We asked for 0. We wanted it zeroed out. We wanted parity with charter school policy on this. So I think they met us what they think is halfway at 3 days. So that's one thing. And then the other thing about do students have to participate for a minimum number of days outside of that 3-day window? Really, I think it's important just for all of you to conceptualize that independent study is an educational option for the student. It's not an educational option for the LEA. And so if a student is enrolled in IS and let's say they're thriving, even so, I can't imagine this being an actual condition, but let's say they're thriving academically. And so you're not assessing through your evaluation, you're not showing that they're not making satisfactory educational progress. So you're not going to trigger re-engagement, and you're not going to trigger that swift transition plan to put them back in the classroom in person. If they request it, or their parents request it, then you have an obligation to place them in an alternative educational program, including returning them back to the classroom if that's their choice after consulting with them. Now, I do want to just highlight though that the law doesn't specify this, and I do think that this is sort of where your flexibility is. You don't if you've reached maximum capacity at that student's home school, based on their attendance boundaries, as long as you're accommodating them in another school at their appropriate grade level within the district, that's sufficient. You don't have to accommodate them necessarily at their home school. Does that help, Naj? Yeah, absolutely. That does help. Let me go ahead and see if I've got my list correct here as we say goodbye to both of you. Barrett, I need to go to Kevin and say, you need better sound equipment at your desk. And Patti, I need to go to Tony Thurman and say, your website is no good. Get it going appropriitly. Is that list, Edgar? Do you sign off on that list? We're good to go.
They're both my friends here, so I'm just gonna stay quiet now.
Okay. I'll go to Tony, but we'll make sure he isn't talking about cheesesteaks. We'll make sure he gets that website beefed up. Barrett Snider from Capital Advisors, Patti Herrera from School Services of California. Thank you to both of you for your time. Honor to have you. So much information. Thanks so much again for being with us today. Edgar, let me bring you back on here because this was so many questions today. So many questions, and if we weren't able to get to all of them, we know that there will be plenty more as they come, and so just be prepared for that. Again, there were a couple of things that our members requested. Information about AB 104 was one of them, and I believe there was one other request. Edgar, I don't remember.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to give a couple plugs for where we ran out of time. So, we would take us another 30 minutes to get through some of these. But we will promise, obviously, when we're back, we'll try to answer some more of these. But a couple places just for folks looking for information. On our resource hub, as promised, we actually put something out on AB 104 bill that got signed into law a couple days ago. Our team put out kind of a summary there that I think explains it nicely. So we'll make sure that's up. Give us a little bit of time. We'll get that up on the ACSA website as well. Same thing. I know a few people wanted the overview on everything we talked about today as well. Ivana, our team, did a very nice job of kind of putting that together in a succinct fashion. We'll have that up on the resource hub. And then as both of Barrett and Patti talked about, they both have conferences coming up in the next week. Well, they'll go deep dive on a lot of these requirements. So go to the Capital Advisors website or go to the School Services website, and you could find information on their workshops there.
And folks, I will invite you to like what you see on Facebook, subscribe to us on YouTube. That will give you instant notifications on the next time we have a show or any live broadcast that's going to be coming up from ACSA. You'll be able to get that information. Reminder, no show next week, although I think that we're still going to have a lot of questions, Edgar. So a reminder that we are on the 21st of July. Mark your calendar. hopefully we'll have some information, some background really on how some of our education leaders are implementing this. I would say, Edgar, you've said it before, take a breath, right? That seriously seems to be the best thing to do right now, is take a breath.
Yeah, and we usually try to end with advice, and you heard some of that both from Patti and Barrett, but I think that's the best case scenario here. I think please know that we're going to continue to express some of the frustration, especially on some of the intricate parts of the timing and whatnot. But I think some people ask about is this not a done deal? No, I think Patti said it's probably, and Barrett said this, it's probably best to start planning. This is what's going to get signed into law. So they're working with your leadership teams at your respective schools, districts, to think about what do we need to do to now get some of this in place, I think is the best advice we can give.
And if I remember correctly, what Patti said, they vote on this tomorrow, get signed tomorrow. Is that what that is?
Yeah, that's the expectation.
Okay. All right. Folks, thank you so much for participating today. This has been really, really good. Again, we are back on the air July 21st with another live and interactive ACSA legislative lunch break. Edgar, so good to see you, man. We'll see you on the 21st.
Enjoy your time off, Naj. We'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Thanks very much, folks. Thank you so much for joining us here. Have a great rest of the day and a great rest of the week. We'll see you next time.